everyone, this is Melissa for Bello's Designs. Today I'm going to be talking about inks, all the different kinds of inks and what they're used for. Not really going to be making a project. I'm just going to show you some examples of what you can do with these inks. We have many people who always have questions about what ink do I use for what, why, and what can I use instead. So the very first thing that we're going to discuss is what the difference of the inks are. There's a pigment ink and there's dye inks. Typically, your pigment inks are what you're going to use for stamping, and pigment inks are a formula that have pigments, ground fine particles that are color suspended in the medium. Pigment inks are slower drying because the ink actually sits on top of the paper. It doesn't soak in. So these are good for after you have made your backgrounds and you're stamping. They hold their color. They're very opaque, so you don't see through them. They also work good for embossing. Dye inks are a dye that's mixed in with either a water-based medium or something to that extent. They soak into the paper, so depending on what color of paper you have, your ink could change color. Unlike the pigment inks, which is going to stay on top, the color that you see is the color that you're going to get. There are several different kinds, and I'm going to kind of go through that now. So your VersaFine Clairs are pigment inks that are oil-based, so they're waterproof and they're permanent when they dry. They are a little bit slow, so you can use them for embossing, but you can give them a blast or a heat gun or blot them so they don't smear. The dye inks, Reinkers, Tim Holtz Distress Inks or Distress Ink and Distress Oxides are both a dye, except for oxides, which are a dye and a pigment hybrid. So it's got pigment in the color, and that's what gives you that creamy kind of effect. When you water it down, it brings more of the pigment medium to the top, so that's how come you get that, the oxidization look. Distress inks, the ink themselves are dye ink. They are transparent. They blend well together, as do the oxides. And the Elements inks by Lavinia are also a dye-based ink. In my opinion, if you have Distress inks, you don't need to go out and buy the Elements inks, unless, of course, you just want them. If you have the Elements inks, you don't need to buy a lot of the Distress inks in the same colors. Distress inks also have very, very wide range of color, as the Elements only have 12 or 24, I'm not real sure. So these inks are good for your backgrounds. You mix them with water. You can use them on your gel press. You can just use your blending tools and blend them on many different ways. And Tim Holtz has produced several videos, instructional tutorials on how to use these products. If you have questions, please feel free to ask, but if you want to check out his videos, they're a good learning point. Distress oxides also come in sprays. They will separate, and you can see the pigment on the bottom and the dye on the top, so these require a good shaking. You can hear the little bead in there shaking it up. There's many different spray inks as well. This one's by Dilutions, and these are a dye-based spray liquid ink. You can use these the same way that you would use this, other than really stamping, just because it's liquid. You can also mix these all with water and use your paintbrush and use them as a watercolor. I've done that with all three. They all work great. Okay, now a few different kinds of things. This is your Versamark Watermark stamp pad. This is what you use for your embossing powders. So this is a very, very sticky, wet ink. It's clear. You can use it on your stamp and then stamp onto something dark and you'll get a very light image if you just want to use it like that. But most of the time, this is what you're going to use for embossing. You're going to also have your Archival Inks, which are permanent waterproof dye inks. If you look at the back of your pads, they'll tell you that this is an archival waterproof permanent acid-free dye ink. It stays permanent, doesn't water react, so this is a dye ink that isn't mixed with water for its medium. This is also a very fast drying ink, so if you're stamping onto acetate or vellum or something with a glossy finish, this doesn't smear because of it drying so quickly. Brilliance is another one that is this is a pigment ink, but it has shimmer to it. It's kind of sparkly. I don't know if you're going to be able to see that. So this one is a dye-based a pigment that's also good on your glossy surfaces. I prefer the Brilliance to the Archival, just my preference. Then, moving on, we have Stazon Ink. This is a solvent-based ink. This is really good for glass, metal, plastic. This dries fast. It is permanent, and they're not recommended for your clear stamps. You can use it, just give it a good wash. Don't use Stazon solvent cleaner. That is very harsh on your stamps. And just use soap and water. That might stain your stamps, but that's not going to hurt anything. You're just going to have a stain. Okay, then you have your Brushos. So these come in little pots. They are a dry powder. That's what it looks like on the inside. And I opened mine because I didn't know to only poke a hole. So there is a hole there, so you can just sprinkle it. And then you have your little buddy pot that has, this is some Brusho powder just mixed with water. And then you get your liquid form of a watercolor. Then we have alcohol inks. Now, alcohol inks are an alcohol-based ink. This is something that you're going to want to use on a non-porous surface. So Yupo paper, plastic, I use them on tiles all the time. You can use them on glass. Many different things you can do, but they have to be non-porous. If you want to pull a print from your alcohol inked background, you do that with alcohol lift ink and put that on your paper and then put it onto a porous paper and it'll transfer. And you also have your Reinkers. So these are just to refill your ink pads. So this one is for my Nocturne. It does kind of make a mess, and you just put it on your pad and work it in. This one's pretty wet already. There's other things that you can do with your Reinkers. You can just put it on your paper and make backgrounds that way as well. So for cleaning your alcohol, or your, excuse me, the alcohol inks too, but the Pigment VersaFine Clear, if you use hand sanitizer, it will come clean. All of these inks you can stamp with. You're going to get a better image with certain ones. VersaFine Clairs are probably what you're going to hear the most used to stamp. They leave a very nice, crisp image when you're done. So for time's sake, I'm not going to clean my stamp in between every time. I'm just going to blot it off on another piece of paper. So it's very opaque. You don't see through it. Nice, crisp image. This time I'm going to use the Elements. And these are very juicy, so often they're going to get onto your stamp on the edges. And that's okay. It just doesn't look pretty, doesn't affect your stamp. And I'm going to stamp all these and then I'll do a close-up. Also, when you're cleaning with these inks, if you just clean them with water and your rag, and just give them a wipe, that's all you need to do to clean off your stamps. You can add some Dawn dish soap or something like that if you want to, but really just some water will get the job done. Then you're not putting any chemicals on your stamps that might harm them. This distressing pad is kind of dry. Archival. I also feel that Archival is kind of a sticky, so when you hold your stamp, when you press your stamp to your paper, it kind of sticks. That might just because I don't really use it and it gets dried out. Most of these other brands of inks, I only have them in black. And when I first started stamping, this is why I have them all in black, because I didn't know which ink to use on what product. And when I started, I didn't want to make cards. I had no intentions of making cards at all. I just wanted to make tiles. And I learned through many mistakes that what worked and what didn't work. Okay, so that's everything that I can stamp with. I can't stamp with those. I can only watercolor with them. So you have VersaFine Clear, which is a very solid, crisp. Okay, so this is the Elements. It's kind of splotchy. Still gives you a pretty decent image. If you were just using this for, you know, some side flowers, not your main focal point, that would be fine. The green is the Distress Oxide, and same thing, kind of gives it a bit of a splotchy look. The Distress Inks are even more splotchy. Kind of gives it some pretty good texture. So if you're going for a textured look, that might be something you want to stamp with. This one is the Archival Ink. Good, crisp image. Because my ink pad is dry, I'm getting a little bit of just the white showing through, but that's just because how I stamped it. This one here is the Brilliance, which it's shiny. It almost looks gray. It's not really a very dark black. And then this is the Versamark. So you can still see the image there, the watermarked image. It's very light. But if you were doing this on a dark paper, then that would be something you might be looking for, is to get a almost clear image. Okay, so now I'm going to show you just a few things of how these things work when you're trying to make backgrounds. Your elements, the oxides, the spray inks, the distress ink, they're all good for mixing with water. You can use them exactly how they are. You can spray them. These you can mix with water. You can move them around. If you heat set them, they layer, and you'll be able to see those layers. So your oxides, if you blend it, you can do that, and you can make your different shades of blending. You can spritz it with water and smush it and get a kind of a swirled effect. You can use your paintbrush, mix it with some water to paint in your stamps or to mix some color. I use my oxides and my elements a lot for watercolors if I don't want to mix up my Brushos. You can just put them directly on your paper and give them a swirl like that. You can take your oxides, mix your oxides with your distress inks or your elements inks. Let me get that dry real fast. And once they're dry, you can layer it. The color that's underneath stays true to its color. The color on top will affect that color, but it won't move. So they're not mixing together, making mud. Okay. The Elements ink is my favorite to use on gel press. So you just use your brayer, roll it onto your gel press, You can stamp on it, you can add sprays, you can use your Brushos, you can just spray water on it. So many things. Another thing about your inks is you want to use different tools for each kind of ink. So I have this brush that I'm using. I use my Lavinia Stamps brushes with my Lavinia Stamps inks. I have these kind of makeup brushes for my oxides. I have these, the style for my VersaFine clears. Don't mix them because it can contaminate your ink pads and it can change the way they work. So your VersaFine clears, not really good for blending and making backgrounds, but because they float on top, you'll see like Tracy Denton, for example, from Lavinia Stamps, she uses this Twilight for framing her image often. Not necessarily making the background, but just adding that frame because it sits on top of the inks that are underneath of it and it doesn't soak in through those inks. It just stays on top. So different ways of putting your inks down, and you can spray them with water if they're water reactive, and then that bleaches it, kind of gives it a faux bleach effect, and then you get some really nice texture in those inks. So I know this just looks like a mess, which it is, but you can see that the water it does on the sprays. Once this was dry, and now it's got a blue color that is just a reaction from the oxide and the ink that was above it. Your VersaFine clears are not going to move. They're not going to react with that water at all. Most likely it'll just, the water will sit on top of that ink, and then you're going to have to dry it, or it'll dry itself, but it won't pull the ink through the stamp underneath of it. So I hope this gives you all some very good tips on what ink pads to use and why to use them, and hopefully help you figure out, if you're a beginner and you don't have many products, strongly recommend the VersaFine clears for stamping for sure. And then I recommend a dye-based ink for your backgrounds if you're creating backgrounds. A few colors that you like that you can work together. I would choose 3 colors that mix together. So don't buy, you keep your primary colors. Your blue, yellow, red. That way you can mix them to get your oranges, to get your purples. That's what I would recommend. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below. If you are on our Facebook groups, or if you're on Facebook, we have 2 Facebook groups. We have Bello's Designs Lounge, retailer of Lavinia stamps, where we showcase our work that we make with Lavinia stamps. And we have Bello's Designs Lounge a la carte. This is where we showcase everything else that Patty sells, such as Cardio, Sweet Poppy stencils, Nellie's Choice, Pink Ink Designs, All in Create, several things. So follow us. If you have questions, ask there. That is a huge community that is so willing to help anybody. We love to see all forms of work, from very, very beginner to your very first piece to some very extremely talented people in that group. We just love it all. So please, if you're on Facebook, subscribe or follow our groups. If you want to follow more YouTube tutorials, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We try to have a few tutorials every week. We have 5 designers who all know different things, create different ways, and are always very excited to help anybody. So thank you for joining me today. You guys have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.